For one of the brushes I want to do, we'll need an ink splatter, and the splatter will need to dry. So I do this right now, and I'm going to explain how we do that. So you want to get some cardstock or just some thickish paper and some black ink, and it's really better if you use black ink because you want some parts that are really saturated black, so we get the full opacity in our brush. And I'm having just two brushes here and some water to dilute it a little bit. Let's try to talk correct English here. Okay. I will just do some splatters and we will use them in a brush. So I have this ragged brush which is a little bit stained and old and has hair flying all over the place, and I have just a nice round brush. And I'll do two different kinds of splatters. So I'm just gonna literally grab some of that ink and then I'm just gonna add some water and kind of just want to have some parts which are a little bit less saturated, and I'm trying to do this in a shape that's flattish at the top and around and more rounded. Okay, that's my splatter number one. Then I'm just gonna do like a nicer splatter, let's say like that. So I'm just grabbing some ink and I'm gonna do something like an oval shape. Just start like that, and I'm just gonna get some water, and I'm trying to get a little bit of dilution here again, get some fresh water. So we have some part of it that's a little bit lighter in color. At least that's what I'm trying to do, which is not the easiest when your ink is wet. But you could also let this dry and then add a little bit of water afterwards, but I'm just gonna do this right now like that. So I have a nice and a little bit more of a textured splatter. I could just like go ahead and grab a little piece of paper here and just dab some of it on here to remove some of the ink, and then go in with just a touch more ink like that. Okay, so I have two splatters here and I let them dry, and then I'm going to either scan them, or if you don't have a scanner you can take a picture, but I'm going to scan them as soon as they're dry. So see you later. Creating custom brushes in Procreate is not some witchcraft or anything. It is actually quite simple as soon as you become familiar with the brush panel and how it works. In this guide, I want to give you an introduction into brush creation. My focus lies on lettering brushes because that's what I use Procreate for, but I suppose my tips could also help you out if you want to do some drawing. I want to teach you brush creation and actually creating brushes. So we're going to create 5 brushes today, always increasing the complexity of the brush. The 5 brushes I want to create with you today are a monoline brush, which I'm going to call a felt tip pen, a brush pen type of brush, a textured brush, so we're going to do a chalk brush, and after you've created these 3 brushes, we're actually going away from the Pro library and we'll be creating custom shapes. The first custom shape will be an ink splatter, and the second one will be a more designed shape in Procreate. Okay, what do you need to create custom brushes? Obviously, apart from the iPad and Procreate. So you should have a pressure sensitive stylus like the Apple Pencil. Otherwise, testing and creating pressure reactive brushes wouldn't really make sense. Then you'll need a piece of paper, some black ink, a brush, preferably a scanner if you don't have a scanner, you can also use a camera from the iPad or just a phone if that's a better camera, because the iPad's camera is not the best. And if you don't have a scanner, you can use like scanning apps as well. It will just require a little bit more adjustments. You will need all of those tools just for one brush, the ink splatter brush. If you don't want to create an ink splatter brush, you don't need to have all of these tools. Also, it would be great if you read the Procreate handbook, but in case you haven't, you want to download that and refer to the brush chapter when you go about creating your personal custom brushes. I'm just going to show you. You want to bookmark advanced brush settings and making custom brushes, which are on page 62 and 69, all of these sections that follow. After that, go into explaining the whole brush panel a little bit more in detail maybe than I will go into, and explain a bit more how brushes are made in Procreate. Okay, let's get started. So I have Procreate open here, and now I'm going to create a square document, and you can give it a name or leave it untitled, however you want it. What I like to do is I like to change my background to black and work with a white text color, and the reason for that is that I feel like I can distinguish differences in opacity a lot better in just when I have a white text on black than the other way around. Which is for texture brushes, that's just a little bit easier for me. So I will work in black, and I recommend working on a black background, but if you don't want to do that, you can do whatever you want. So we have a document now. What we want to create now is a new brush set where we have all of our brushes. And you create new brush sets when you scroll all the way to the end. There's a button that says new set, and you can tap that, and then you can call it something like custom. And if you want to move it around, we can just grab it and move it by just forcing it to move, which does not want to right now. Okay, you can just move it wherever you want it. I'm just going to delete that because I have mine set up here with just a copy of the gel pen brush because I want to do adjustments, but yours will be empty. And we are not customizing brushes in this tool. We are making them all from scratch, no copying. So we will work in here using the plus sign. But first, I want to talk about what makes a line in Procreate. So every line we draw has three basic characteristics. We have the stroke plot, the brush shape, and the grain. So the grain could basically be any image that you want. It will affect what the inside of the brush shape looks like. So I'm gonna try this with a food metaphor. Your brush basically is like a cookie cutter, and the grain is the dough. So the cookie will then be lined up on the stroke plot. How this will line up and in what configuration is what will be determined in our brush settings. But basically, stroke plot is the path we draw, the brush shape is our cookie cutter, and the grain is our dough, whatever's inside of our cookie cutter. Okay, so these three words are clear now, so this is what I'll be talking about. I will mostly be talking about plot, shape, and grain. What else do we need to know before starting? Okay, streamline and how to test. So streamline is the line smoothing tool of Procreate. and there's different opinions about streamline. I know some people like it, other people hate it. I personally have my streamline set to 100% in most of my brushes, but other people really hate it. But if you create a brush, you will want to test it with streamline at max. Even if you never use streamline, you will have to turn streamline to max. Because what streamline does, it will remove any wobbles you got. So you won't have any shakiness from your line that you drew yourself. So it will look exactly how you determine it, which will be important when we talk about jitter. And the other thing is sometimes streamline does some weird things on pressure sensitive brushes, and you just want to be aware of that. And you want to know when and how it happens. So when people come and say your brush does weird things, you know why. And you maybe can help by saying reduce the brush size or do something else. Then obviously you could spend hours testing your brush by just writing whatever you want. But the thing I would recommend you do is whenever you try a new brush is you should letter high. High because there's the three basic elements we need to check. It's a thin upstroke, a heavy downstroke, and the eye dot. And you might be asking, why the hell should I test for the eye dot? But creating lettering brushes means you should be able to do lettering. And I've had quite a lot of brushes fail because I was unable to create an eye dot. So you want to test that. This is just the quickest, most effective way to test if a brush does work for lettering. So especially pressure sensitive ones. So streamline high. Okay, let's create our first brush. In this first brush, the first brush I want to make is really easy, very, very basic. It's a classic felt tip pen. Believe it or not, there is no default brush in Procreate that feels like a felt tip. And I wanted to change that, and that's what we're gonna do. So we open our brushes, we open our set, and tap the plus sign. Then we can select our shape and our grain. We all know now that's the cookie cutter and that's the dough. So our dough will just be from the Pro Library. We are going to work with the Pro Library right now. So these are all of the predefined grains and shapes from all of the default brushes, and you can just use these. So I'm just gonna look for the blank here. We just want plain vanilla dough for that. And then we don't want any texture. For the shape, what does a felt tip pen look like? It's round. So I'm going into the Pro Library and create the hard round brush. So that's set, and we automatically are brought into the stroke. I'm just going to tap the name here and call this felt tip. And then let's look at our stroke panel. So in this, first we want to put streamline all the way up because we learned that we want to test like that. And then we remove all of the spacing. We want our cookies to be stacked as closely as possible, just so nothing happens here in between, because if we increase that, we could basically create a pearl brush. We don't want that. We don't want any irregularity. We want it all tightly. Then let's talk about jitter. Jitter means how much the shape is offset from the stroke plot. So if I'm just gonna go in here and create that, and as you can see now these all align all perfectly. Now if I put some jitter on there, you can see that these shapes move away from the stroke plot. So a felt tip usually bleeds a slight bit. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add a little bit of jitter, like something like 8%. So there's just a tiny bit of jitter in here. Okay, next thing is taper. And if there is one thing I despise in lettering brushes is when people apply taper to the start. And I'm just just gonna show you. So I'm gonna put start taper all the way up. Okay, let's write high. And you see what happens. I don't have any pressure reaction here, so this just happens whenever I start a line. You do not want to apply that to a lettering brush because downstrokes need to start differently. Downstroke needs to start like this, not like this. So please, please don't apply a start taper on a lettering brush. Never, ever. Then I don't like having anything to do with opacity, so I'm going to remove that. And now for an end taper. You don't necessarily need an end taper, but to make it feel like a felt tip pen, whenever I try to lift up my pen a little bit when I stop writing with felt tip. So I would just apply a tiny bit of that for like 13 or 15%, which would just really just taper a slight bit at the end. And we can just test that again by writing high. And now you can see it's just slightly different when I pick up here. And when I'm just writing like that, you won't even see it. It's just a tiny detail, but I like tiny details. And as you can see, when I reduce my size just a little bit and write felt tip, this actually looks done, right? So we just created our very first brush without ever even having to look at any other panel than the stroke panel. That's how easy it is to create a monoline brush. Okay, you managed that. Let's go ahead if we can and see if we can tackle a brush pen. So when we create lettering, we usually wish to create flat looking tops. Like we have copperplate, you want to have a really, really straight top. In modern lettering, you usually have something that looks like an oval, maybe rounded. But usually you want to go with an oval for just the default brush pen. There's round brush pens as well. I have a whole set of them, which is the quote set. But for the default one, for the first brush pen, I would go with flattish tops. And for that, the shape we need is an oval. And grain, we're just going to go with the same grain we had before the blank one because we don't want any texture applied. And call this one brush pen because that's what it's going to be. And if we look at this pen right now, it looks a little bit weird. And if I'm just going to increase the size of that, you can see that it does look wrong. If I go ahead and rotate my iPad right now and do the same thing again, it looks different. It should look different, but it does not, which is weird. Is it really set up properly? Now you can see what I mean. So as you can see, I rotated my iPad. Here it's weird, and here we have the wider element on our right on the correct position, in the correct position. So I'm just going to rotate that again. The reason for that is that by default, Procreate does not have the same keep the orientation with the iPad. It just has the orientation for like the portrait mode, and in landscape mode it will behave weirdly. So I'm just going to save you some trouble and tell you in the general tab, tap orient to iPad screen whenever you have a shape that's not the same on all sides. So you have a width and a height that's different. So keep that and it will just behave correctly everywhere. Okay, so as you can see, it already has a little bit of difference when we have a downstroke and when we have a stroke like a vertical stroke. There's differences in the line width. But we want to make it pressure sensitive now. So in the stroke setting, I'm just going to do what we did before, but this time I'm going to apply the end taper all the way. And I'm not going to apply any jitter because I want it to be a smooth brush. Okay. Now we have that. And we have streamlined, so our lines look nice. But we're not done yet. So my glass almost dropped. So if we want to add some pressure sensitivity, what we are going to do is we are going to ignore shape, grain, and dynamics. We're going right into pencil. And here are pressure settings and some tilt settings. We are going to ignore the tilt settings because tilt means if you change the way you hold your pencil, and this works just with the Apple Pencil and not with other styluses, it will change something about it. But since lettering is hard enough, just with pressure, you should not apply anything to tilt. The first thing you need to do is just with the start taper, there's another thing that's really not something you want to have in lettering brushes, and that's the softness setting. And if you ever lettered in an Adobe program, you know that there's this weird behavior when you change your pressure, that it has kind of like a lag to it. The reason is that Adobe basically softens your changes in weight, in pressure, like the line width changes are softened. And that's what this setting does. And you want to remove that, because if we change our pressure in lettering, we do that intentionally, and we want the extreme changes in pressure to show up immediately. So remove that. Now I want to create an extremely pressure sensitive brush, so I go ahead and move that size all the way up to max. So now I have a pressure sensitive brush, and it's much too large. Here's, by the way, that's the weird behavior. I did streamline and now it's not showing again. Here, those weird little edges, that's what streamline happen. What streamline does when the size is too big. So now it's too small. Let's go. Sizing is something for itself. Okay. Remove that. Clear that. Okay. So here is an extremely pressure sensitive brush with extreme settings. Go into the General tab. So if you've read my blog post about your pressure curve, you will have read about me saying that you want to test the pressure curve with a brush that allows for the complete range of the sizing. This means that in the limits, there's no limitation of min and max. So exactly what I have right here. Right here, I have an unlimited brush with a very high contrast. I really like that. Some other people don't. So what I would suggest is not changing the minimal, because in lettering, hairlines are nice, so you should keep your hairlines. But if you don't want to have such a width, you could go ahead and say something like 60 or 50%, and it will just reduce your max width a little bit and have a little bit less contrast, in case you like that better. So I think that brush pen is done now, right? We're moving really fast now. It's not even 20 minutes and you already created a pressure sensitive brush. Isn't it cool how easy that is? So let's go ahead and create the next one. The next one is going to be a texture brush, the chalk brush. Okay. So I love chalk brushes, and there are a lot of really cool chalk brushes, but everyone does it a little bit differently. Here's my method, which is obviously my favorite chalk brush, but it's not really about creating a chalk blush, it's about showing you how to create a texture with the brush. Okay, for the shape, you could go ahead and do the oval again, but there's another shape in the Pro library, which is oval, but it has a slight texture to it, which is this oval here. And since we are talking about chalk, chalk is not very, is a little bit transparent. So I use that, and for the grain, I will go ahead and look for the noise, which is somewhere. Let's look. How was that? Okay, that's noise. Okay, and now in the stroke, I'm just gonna do exactly what I did before, and in the pencil as well. I'm not gonna do like, I'm just gonna add a little bit of minimal here because it's unrealistic for a chalk brush to have like such fine lines. So I'm gonna add a little bit here. Again, orient to iPad screen. Okay. Then in the general settings, because we talk chalk, the opacity should be a little bit less than 100%. So I'm going to say that the maximum opacity is 90%. So you will always have a little bit of transparency to it. Then for the grain, let's look at a new tab. This is really a lot of trial and error. I'm going to be honest, I hardly ever do brushes with grains. There's so many different things to change it, and I feel like that the grain is mostly done for people that do drawing and painting in Procreate because they cover larger areas. If we just do a line, the texture doesn't really matter too much. I often feel like it even ruins my design, so I stick to blank most of the time. But for the chalk brush, I would really just increase the scale a little bit so that the noise shows up a little bit more, and the rest is actually fine. So rolling is all right. I'm going to leave the zoom in here, and I'm going to remove. I'm going to add filtered. I'm going to add filtered. And let's just give this a test and look at it. As you can see, there's my texture applied. It is a little bit transparent. You can see some of the lines underneath here, and it's pressure sensitive. And it looks like chalk if the camera will focus correctly, and you can see that. In case not, I will just zoom you in a little bit here. So you can see changing that, thickening your lines a little bit. I might actually even thicken it a little bit more because it's really a little unrealistic to have such thin hairlines with chalk. And I just really like this brush. And we talked about the grain tab, so we have another tab covered, and we have created 3 brushes already. So you have your basics now. Let's go ahead and finally get started with some cool brushes. We leave the Pro library behind now. I'm just gonna have to check out what I wrote down because I want to mention everything. Okay, so you have the basics, and at the beginning of the video I showed you how I created some ink splatters, and what I did is I let them dry while I was preparing this video, and then I scanned it using a scanner app because I have an HP printer that scans, and there's an app for it. And I was just able to scan it on my iPad, and I imported it into Photoshop Express here, which is a free app. If you don't have a scanner, just take a picture and make it black and white. If you don't have black ink, just make it black and white, and then open it in Procreate in Photoshop Express and start adding a little bit of the settings. So I like to just play with my settings here. So there's like the noise reduction is really cool. So I like adding a little bit of noise reduction here. And I just used one of the splatters here. Then there's really what you want to focus most if you don't have a scanner is creating a white background. You want your background to be completely white because everything that's not white will show up in Procreate. So I feel like I'm done here. So I'm just gonna save that to my camera roll. You want to have your splatter, have it black and white, or try to make it black and white if you can, and have your background as white as possible. And then you want to go back into Procreate and you want to create a white layer. I'm literally just dragging my white color here into a new layer. And the reason why we created a square image is because we want to create our brush right in here. So Procreate will basically squish your preview image if it's not square. So you should just go ahead and make it square. Fit your splatter in here like that. I'm just going to move it a little bit down. And then we want to open the actions, go to canvas and say copy canvas to clipboard. Okay. Then we create our new brush, which I'm just going to go ahead and call splatter. Like this. And I'm gonna go into shape and I'm gonna hit clipboard here, and then I'm going to go ahead and just do a blank gray again. And now you can see that something weird is happening. It's basically taking the wrong shape. So what we need to do is we need to invert it, because Procreate takes the white pixels and makes them visible and makes the black pixels invisible. So to invert it, we take 2 fingers and tap our brush. And now you can see that it looks all right. Now again, I'm just gonna apply the same settings as before. So I'm just gonna create a pressure sensitive brush again. Remove the softness if I can, increase the size, go into general, orient to iPad screen. I'm not going to restrict anything, and I'm just gonna make this invisible and delete that and change white and write high. Oh, create a new layer, otherwise I can't write anywhere. Okay, that's much too big. Make it a little bit bigger. Okay, that looks all right, but I do have some changes in the opacity here and they are not showing up. The reason is we need to make them show up. So right now, what Procreate does is it takes all of the shapes, all of our cookies, and puts them on top of each other because we have removed all of the spacing. So if we have a cookie or just a layer that has opacity 10%, and then on top of that we put another layer with opacity 10%, it will double to 20%. So if that happens as often as it happens here, you will be at 100% opacity super fast. So to make our opacity changes show up, we can tap glazed here, and then you will see that our changes in opacity are showing up. So I should not delete those layers. Now you can see the nice streaks we got in our shape. If the camera will pick it up, you can see it lightly. So there's a lot of different lines in here. So that's in our dynamic settings. What else is in our dynamic settings? There's the color mix, and the thing called fall off, you want to really ignore that, because when lettering, we don't want to run out of ink. This basically tells the brush when to run out of ink. We don't run out of ink ever. Don't run out of ink ever. Now, accumulative is basically doing the same thing that Procreate does by default. It's just adding up the layer opacity, but you can adjust it and say that we just want to do it by like a certain percentage, like 30%. I'm just gonna put that next to it. You can see that it looks a little bit weird. So I usually don't use accumulative at all. I just go with glazed or the default. Then you could also make your brush react to changes in how fast you or slow you write. But since lettering is already kind of difficult and you have to take care of your pressure already, I really wouldn't apply any settings to your speed. Okay, what else can we do? So we have a splatter here, and splatters are really cool because they look different. You change the direction. So I'm just gonna write an H right now. I'm just gonna go ahead and make it smaller. And what I'm gonna do then is I'm going to rotate my shape and write again. So this does not look good because of the pressure, because we have basically an oval shape, but this should look good again. Does it look better? Now I'm really just comparing how I like it. As you can see, the difference is especially visible in our beginning here. So this side creates a flatter top. So that's what I'm going to keep. I'm going to keep that. Oh, that's my computer that made a weird sound. So I'm going to keep that the direction of this one because I prefer the stroke creates on a downstroke. But you can just play with this. Splatters are a lot of fun, especially if you just add like a dot somewhere. It will just create some loose strands basically in your brush, which just looks really cool. And you made your first custom brush now. So now it's time for our last brush. And the last brush is really a brush I can't really help you with a lot, but I will try and explain how I personally go about creating designed brushes. So designed brush, what does that mean? This means that we have a brush that has a planned shape. So we have an intention before we start with what our brush will look like, and it will look like differently than what these brushes look like. So I mean, we have a custom shape here, but it's not really intentional. We just do a splatter. Well, you can have some intention with it, but not as much as when you go ahead and create your shape in Procreate. So I want to talk about an example I made, and this will just help explaining the last tab of the brush panel as well. So it's not really a lettering brush, but I'm going to tell you about the idea I had. So I recently really got into flourishing, and then at some point I was just sitting around doing these flourishes here, and I was looking at them, and then I asked myself, wouldn't it be awesome to create a brush that can do exactly that shape? While I draw a line, it will just do that. So I wanted to create that, even though I knew it would not work for lettering. I just wanted to try it. So how do you know what shape you need for that? So you basically look at your end result. So my end result should be this. And you look for the pattern that repeats itself. So you can see this thing repeats itself and this thing repeats itself. So basically if we cut this here or here, this element will always look the same. We always have a shape that looks like this. Now, if we align all of these elements, we will really have to take a lot of care that these and these endings match. So that's not the best idea. But what if we had a shape that looked like this? So basically all that would add up is that point and that point. And if you look at them, they are basically in the same line already. So that's basically our key. We need this shape and we need these two to match up. To match up, I would always go with importing a grid. And I have a grid on my website. You can download it for free. So I have templates, and I'm just gonna go ahead and import my dot grid here. So I have a dot grid, which is obviously black. So I'm just gonna alpha lock it and fill it with white. And then I'm just gonna remove some of the opacity here. And now I'm going to remove the size here, and I'm going to remove all of these, and I'm going to draw a help line now, because dots are nice and all, but just so I really can orient myself. I'm creating a quick line here. So that's about the middle, something like that. Now, if I want even some differences in weight, I can create my shape using a brush pen. So I will start here, and this does not look too good. So that should do fine. Okay, so that's my shape. I'm going to remove that. I'm going to remove that. And since we are working in Procreate, I'm going to just remove my background, have it in white, my layer, and then do the same thing. Copy canvas to clipboard. And where's my design brush? Is it gone? Let's go ahead and call this one design. In the shape source, I'm going to add clipboard. Grain is going to be Pro Library and blank. And now I'm just going to do the same thing again. I'm going to say orient to iPad screen. Going to do some size limits and add them a little bit up. I'm going to do that and that. Dynamics, I'm not going to add any glaze. I'm not going to add a grain. And in my stroke, I'm not going to do that. Well, I need to add some spacing, as you can see. So how much spacing do I need? That does not look like I wanted. Okay, let's go ahead and test that. Well, the brush kinda does what I want, but not on this edge. So what happened? Basically what I want is I want the shape to follow my line exactly how I write it. And currently that's not happening because we never needed that, but now I need that. So what I do is I go into shape, which is our last tab, and I read the Procreate handbook, and then I see something which is called rotation. And if I move this all the way to the end, it says follow stroke, which is exactly the setting I need. Or is it not? Let's rotate this just to check. I think that might be correct, but it's not doing the right thing because something is wrong in my settings. So I'm just going into orient to iPad screen and remove that just because I feel like that might be it. Oh yeah, that might be it. Now it looks exactly how I want it. That's how this brush was made. It's very, very easy when you know that the follow stroke exists. What else is in this shape behavior group, just so we are talking about every single thing? We have a scatter, which basically is just the rotation, the orientation of your brush shape while you are writing. You can randomize it. This means that whenever you start your line, it will just choose a random orientation. And then there's the azimuth, I really don't know how to pronounce this, but this means that it will just orient itself based on how you hold your pencil. I've never really been able to make use of this setting, but you might be able to.